Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to my channel, Do Ministry Gaming, and today I'm going to be walking through the specific 3.14 patch note changes that directly impact the Toxic Rain and the Bleed Bow build guides that I had recently put out. Now, I do explain everything in as much detail as I can, and so I do have timestamps in the description below. If you're just curious about the Toxic Rain, or if you're just curious about the Bleed Bow sections, or even you don't care about the mechanics and you just care about a TLDR version of whether the build is still viable or not, and also whether the build is still viable as a league start or not, I've got those timestamps below as well. All right, so before we dive into it, there is just one thing I want to mention, and that is that I do feel bad that I put out a couple of these build guides and then they were nerfed in the patch notes, which then caused some confusion for you guys in terms of whether the builds are still viable or not, and whether they're still good league starters or not. And I did have a reason for doing so. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have. But it's something I'm learning along the way as well. This is the first time I've ever done it. And so the next league, I'll probably do it differently, of course. But I just wanted you to at least understand, my reasoning behind um, having them released early this time around. And that is that I wanted to give the viewers some more time to digest the information, at least from a personal experience or at least from my own perspective. Oftentimes, I find that going into a league start, I feel very like rushed trying to find a league start build because it takes time, right? It takes time to go and research a bunch of builds and then digest the information and what have you. And between the patch notes and league start, there's only a couple days. And so between those 2 days, it often feels very rushed, especially if you've got other priorities in your life. For me anyway, right? I mean, to go through a build guide, it's already 35, 40 minutes minimum to get a build, to watch a build guide. Then you got to digest the information. You got to do some research. You got to do some comparisons, maybe check out a few other videos, get some second opinions. So all that takes a lot of time, and time is hard to come by. And so the idea was that I put out these videos 10 days ahead of league start so that you have some time to think about it, ask questions, and get answers before you go into the league start. And I was particularly careful about the builds that I picked because I thought of that maybe it would be nerfed in the patch notes. I picked two builds specifically, Toxin and Bleed Bow, because they were um, long-standing builds that have been around forever, that have been tried and true, and also have not had changes made to them for a very long time. Okay, so Toxic Rain came out in patch 3.4 10 patches ago, and for 10 patches in a row, it was a viable league start untouched. There was one time GGG touched Toxic Rain, and it was a basically an insignificant change, changing the Fizz to Chaos conversion from 60% to 50%, which doesn't even impact this build at all. With Bleed Bow, similar thing. And so I tried to selectively pick a couple builds that had a very low probability, I thought, of being nerfed. Then it turns out they were both impacted. So again, I feel a little bad about that. And so next time around, I'll definitely do it a little differently. And so for next league, you can expect that. So without further ado, let's get into the guts of it and see what these changes are for these builds and whether they are still both A, viable as a build in general, and B, whether they're still viable as league starters, in my opinion. All right, so I'll start with the Toxic Rain changes and how they are going to impact the build. And the TLDR version is that I think A, the build is absolutely still viable despite the changes. And to be clear, the changes are nerfs. They are definitely nerfs to the build. But I do believe the build is still viable. It should still be able to do all the endgame content that I showed in my build guide video, like Cyrus, Elder, Shaper, Guardians, mapping. All of that should still be absolutely doable with this build, with this change. Okay, and B, I believe it's still going to be a very strong league starter. Again, this is my opinion. But before we get started, there is one caveat, and that is the spread range change that GGG has made to toxic range in this patch. They did not provide any numbers for what that range is. And so there's no way to quantify exactly how much of a damage reduction we're talking here, potential damage reduction. Even if they did give us a number, it's actually incredibly difficult to calculate that number. And so part of the conclusions that I'm going to draw in this video is going to be qualitative and certainly my opinion only. And so definitely take that with a grain of salt as you watch the rest of this video. All right, so to get into the changes themselves, there were really a couple key changes in the patch notes that I've clipped out and put onto the screen here. The first are changes made directly to the skill itself, and the second are changes to the cluster jewels that were used in my build guide. Technically, I guess there's a third change, of course, which is the harvest nerfs, which would indirectly impact this build. But I'm not going to talk too much about that because harvest changes are indirectly impacting every build across the board pretty much. And so I didn't think it was really much sense to talk about it. If you have questions, though, feel free to pop by my stream, shoot me a comment in the YouTube, and ask away. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have as to how harvest itself will impact this particular build. Now, for the toxic range skill itself, they made two changes. The first is the spread range of spore pods from toxic rain is now affected by area effect modifiers. This means that having higher area effect causes the resulting spore pods to spread out more. The base spread range of the spore pods has also been slightly lowered. Again, there's no numbers here, okay? So we don't know to what extent this is. And also, if this didn't immediately make sense to you, don't worry about it. I've got like some diagrams and stuff coming up to explain how this is going to impact toxic rain. So you can, wait for that. The next is and also that this is really the key change. All this other stuff is nerfs, but they're less significant than this one by a lot. So the next one is each spore pod now applies 5% less movement speed, previously 10, and to a maximum of 30%, previously 60. So the slow that is on toxic rain is basically cut by half now. Again, not a big impacted change, I don't think, but we can talk about it. Then there's cluster jewel changes, wicked paw and widespread destruction saw changes. Actually, there's one more that I did not clip on here, which is tempered arrowheads, which we will talk about at the end here. So let's go and talk about what this spread range thing means for toxic rain. So to understand how the spread range impacts the skill, we got to understand how the skill itself works. All right, so the way toxic rain works is you fire a volley into the air and it comes down and it falls on the ground. And let's say you have 7 pods, okay, which is 4 from the base skill and plus 3 arrows, like from Dying Sun or something. 7's pretty typical. So you have 7 pods, they land on the ground and they do some damage over time and then they explode. And so what I have here is a diagram representing that. So the 7 purple circles represent the 7 different pods that land on the ground. And the big blue circle represents the area that these pods can fall in, okay? And so I explained this on stream earlier today, and we used the pizza analogy, and so we're going to stick with that, okay? If the 7 pods, the purple circles, we're going to call that pepperoni, and then we're going to call the big blue circle the pizza, okay? So pepperoni and pizza. Now, what increased area of effect used to do is the following. It would make the pepperoni bigger, but it would not change the size of the pizza. And so what that means is, as you can already see from the diagram, is when you increase the area of the pepperonis, you're eventually going to start to see the pepperonis overlap. Okay, the pods overlap. And when they overlap, they're going to do extra damage. This is something that's actually quite unique to Toxic Rain as a damage over time skill. Okay, if you have 2 caustic arrows sitting on top of each other, they do not stack, okay? You only get damage from 1 caustic arrow. You can have 10 on top of each other. They're still going to do the damage of 1. Whereas Toxic Rain, the more pods you can stack on top of each other, the more damage you're going to do. If 2 pods are on top of each other, you're going to do twice the damage. If 3 pods, you're going to do 3 pods worth of damage. 4 pods, etc., etc. And so the key, one of the ways of scaling the damage, as I explained in my build guide, is to scale area effect, among other things: attack speed, increased duration, plus arrows, etc., etc. So basically increasing the size of pepperoni is going to increase overlap. Now, if you had a monster, let's say this green circle here, bad pepperoni is Cyrus, okay? Even before, typically when you fire one volley, not every pod hits the boss or hits the monster, okay? If you have some area, you might see two pods overlapping, two pepperonis overlapping on Cyrus here, and you're gonna do 2 pods worth of damage. If you get 3 pods, then 3, right? But even before the change, you're gonna see, a large number of pods probably not hitting the boss target that you're shooting anyway. Now, what the new change to increase of area does is not only does it increase the size of the pepperoni, but it also increases the size of the pizza. And that's really all it is. And why that is a nerf is because now the probability that your pepperoni is going to overlap is going down, right? Before, you had a small pizza, and if your pepperoni gets bigger, there's no space, so your pods are going to overlap. Now, it is a lower probability that your pods are going to overlap. However, if you still have bad pepperoni, Cyrus, it is still possible to hit Cyrus with 2 pods, okay? It's just the probability that that is going to happen is gone down by whatever number they have made this spread range, okay? And that's where we don't know the actual number in terms of, what that number is and how big the spread is going to be. But, in this diagram, you're seeing 2 pods overlap, but very well, you could see this, where only 1 pod hits the boss. And if there's enough spread range, maybe 1 volley doesn't even hit the boss. All right, so that is how the area effect portion impacts the skill. Now, area effect is not the only way to stack pods on a monster. And so, it's only a portion of it. Your attack speed, of course, is a huge component to it. In my POB, I show a little over 3 attacks per second, I believe. And so really, you're firing 3 volleys, 3 of these 7 pods on top of each other every second. And on top of that, you've got Mirage Archers stacking more pods as well. You've got increased duration impacting the build. So the longer the pods stay on the ground, the more you can stack on top of each other, and then additional arrows as well. And so actually, even before the change, additional arrows also increased spread range. But it was still good, and was still a good way to increase the probability that you're going to overlap the pepperonis on any given monster, okay? So there's many mechanisms to stack pods. Area is but one of them, and so this is a nerf, but does it kill the build? I don't think it does. On to the cluster jewel changes. There were 3 changes that were made. The first is to Wicked Paw, which I showed 3 of in my build guide. Each one took 5% damage and 5% duration hit for a total of 15 damage and 15 duration. Widespread Destruction hit saw a 4% AoE hit, and Tempered Arrowheads saw a 10% duration hit. Overall, when you sum that all up, you're looking at a 25% duration hit, 4% AoE, and 15% damage. It sucks, especially the duration, but not a build killer at all either. So here are my conclusions, which I've kind of already mentioned in TLDR already. And again, this is my opinion. And again, this is qualitative. There's no spread range numbers to quantify what I'm saying here. But my opinion is that A, the build is still viable to all the content that I showed in my build guide, absolutely. B, would I recommend it as a league starter still? Yes, I would. And C, what tier league starter would I classify it post nerf? Before, top tier S, now low tier S, top tier A. And yes, I will absolutely be playing this in 3.14. All right, so I'm going to move on to the Bleed Bow Gladiator changes and how they impact the build now. And first of all, the changes were significant. Okay, it had a big impact on the build negatively. But let's still answer the 2 questions. And the TLDR version is the build still viable? My answer, in my opinion, is that yes, I do think it is overall still a viable build. You're going to lose a ton of damage from the changes that they implemented in 3.14. However, I am going to offer solutions in this video as to how you can bridge that damage gap back up in terms of adding some things to the build that I didn't have in there before to make up this damage. Okay, so I think it is still absolutely all content viable if you can make those changes. Now, the second question is, would I still recommend this as a league starter? And the TLDR is no. I think at this point, I probably would not push this as a league starter anymore. Even before the changes, Bleed Bow Glider is not a tier S build, league start build like Toxic Rain is, okay? It was maybe a low end tier A, high end tier B, if I had to put it on a spectrum. And after these changes, I'm going to say it is now low end tier B, high end tier C. Can you still do it? Yeah, you can. You're going to hit walls. You're going to need to upgrade your character. So, more so even than before. And you're going to need to invest, right? And you're going to need to know how to play the game. And so, if you're a brand new player or new-ish, steer clear of this one for now. Would be my recommendation. If you're a seasoned vet and you still want to try it, because A, it looks interesting, B, you have a fallback plan to go swap to Reap or one of the new skills or something, which probably are going to be viable too, then you want to give it a shot, feel free to. Of course, I'm not here to tell you one way or another. And what I'll say is if you decide to do that and you have questions or you hit walls and you want to help overcoming them, feel free to hit up my stream, hit up my chat, hit up my comments. I will be available to help in any way that I can. All right, so the 3 changes in the patch notes that impact the build, there is one big one and a couple small ones, just like the Toxic Rain. And so the first and the biggest impact on Bleed Bow Gladiator is that the Elder Influence weapon modifier that grants 60% chance for bleeding to deal 100% more damage has been removed and replaced with a new local bleeding damage over time multiplier. Now, same thing with the Toxic Rain. They did not provide us any information as to how high this new mod can roll. I know there's different tiers to it, but they didn't provide any what tier 1 is going to look like. So I did have to take a guess at what that might be. And I did replace this in PoB just to see the difference in damage, and I will show you what that is. But then the next change is that the Cluster Jewel Tempered Arrowheads, same as Toxic Rain, the skill effect duration has been reduced by 10%. This is really not even worth talking about. It's a little bit less duration, but it's not really going to have much of a big impact at all. But the third one, this Red Storm Cluster, has been removed. This is a 3 passive cluster that you do take in Bleed Bow Gladiator, and it is replaced with something that you will not take as Bleed Bow Gladiator. All right, so now I'm going to show you the impact of each of these. And so for the first one, the Bleed Bow Elder mod, I went to PoB and I replaced that mod with an arbitrary 75% damage over time multiplier, which is about where I think the T1 roll of the replacement mod is going to be, maybe. You know, this might be high, I don't really know, but I'm saying 75. I mean, it is replacing a very strong Elder mod on a 2-handed weapon, so I wouldn't be surprised if it was this high, but this could be high. But regardless, I don't really know what the real number is, so I'm just using this for now. And if you did, you'd see about a 20 to 25% damage reduction on your puncture. The actual number is about 22% or something. So that is not insignificant. It is quite a big nerf. But down here, I've listed a couple options as to how I would suggest to bridge that gap and make back up that damage, which I'll talk about right after I talk about Red Storm Cluster here. So the Red Storm Cluster, if you just straight remove that, is about a 9% damage reduction on the PoB. However, when you do, you're going to free up 3 skill points, right? And so that's the whole opportunity cost of this cluster. And so you can use those somewhere else, which will make back up some of this damage. And actually, coincidentally, this first option here is going to make it back pretty much exactly the 9% damage. So what you would do with these 3 points is you can take the bottom socket that you already have a skill point in, and you're going to put a Thread of Hope in there with a medium ring. Okay, and then with that, you can actually allocate 3 points to a Disciple of Yielding, which gets you damage per endurance charge, Disciple of Slaughter, which gets you damage per frenzy charge, and Versatile Stance, which gets you damage in blood stance. And that basically pretty much straight offsets the redstone cluster. Now, you have probably a couple other options. One would be, for example, the new clusters they're introducing into the tree. We don't have details on that yet in terms of POB or where it is on the tree. Soon, I think. But anyway, in the patch notes, they reference Veteran Soldier Cluster, which is a damage over time multiplier cluster somewhere around the Templar area. So if it's close to where our tree is, you can certainly take those 3 points and put them there. But otherwise, this Thread of Hope option is absolutely just fine and is something that is guaranteed to work. Now, to make up the 20 to 25% damage for the Bleed Bow, here's a couple options. The first is the Asylum Helm. I've talked about this helm in my build guide as well. This is a helm where you can put a 4-link puncture in and it will do more damage than a 6-link puncture, okay? However, I don't use it in my build guide and I don't use it in any of the highlight clips in my build guide video. And so if you did use it, so put it this way, if my build guide video power is here in terms of highlight clips, and you lose damage from the bow, so you're going to drop 20 to 25%. If you put the Asylum Helm in, you're going to make that back that up and more, actually. You're going to get more than that damage. And so that is one way to bridge that gap. However, the Asylum does come with a sort of a different play style. Which wasn't for me. I really don't like the playstyle of Salem, which is why I don't use it. But if you do like it or are okay with it, it is absolutely a very strong option to make up that damage. The second is something that I actually probably should have just put in the original build guide anyway, but I didn't really think about it until after I put the guide together, and that is running a second curse. So right now in the build guide, you are only running one curse, which is vulnerability on hit. Okay, so what you can do is run a second curse. Now you can get a second curse a couple different ways. The easiest way is to anoint it onto your amulet, Whispers of Doom. That is a notable on the tree that gives you additional curse. Anoint that onto your amulet, or you can get it on a rare chest. You can replace your Belly of the Beast and run a rare chest with some life resists and have the additional curse on it. Now with the additional curse, you can now run Poacher's Mark on top of your vulnerability, and you would have to run it with an Arcanist brand and attach the brand to the boss before you actually fight it. And with the Poacher's Mark on, that is basically a straight up 20% damage increase as well, more damage, and so it will pretty much straight offset the damage that you lose from the bleed mod. So just to repeat, the conclusions, again, this is my opinion. Is the build still viable? Yes, I think it is. It's not dead by any means, especially if you make the changes that I just recommended to offset the damage loss. You'll be just fine. Would I recommend it as a league starter? I think at this point I would not. But if you did decide to play it and you had any questions at all, feel free to drop me a line. You can hit me up on my stream. You can hit me up on Discord. You can leave a comment below, and I will certainly do whatever I can to help. All right, everybody, there you have it. Those are how the changes in the 3.14 patch notes, I think, are going to impact my two recent build guides, Toxic Rain and Bleed Bow. And so thank you very much for watching as usual. And if you found the video helpful, please like and subscribe. Also stream on Twitch Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Come and check it out. Times are in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.